The most important scale exercise in jazz. Now this is of course a really bold claim, but at the same time, if you play jazz, you know that one of the most important things that we use is arpeggios. If you play a jazz solo, then usually the solo will follow the chord progression that is being played over, and we do this most commonly by using arpeggios. You can of course use the arpeggio of each of the chords that you are playing over in the progression, but actually there are more arpeggios available that can work really well, and I'm going to return to that a little later in this video. You're probably also already practicing arpeggios, but I'm sure there's a better, more efficient way of doing this that's going to help you use them when you're soloing and tie everything together, and that's what I want to talk about in this video. My name is Jens Larsen. If you want to learn jazz and make music, then subscribe to my channel and click the little bell notification icon so you don't miss anything. Most of the time I see people practicing arpeggios in positions like this. And that's not wrong, but when you play a solo, you don't want to think about using one pattern for your arpeggio and another one for the scale. You want to use two that really fit together, and you also want to practice your arpeggios in a way that you can use them in your lines really easily. First, I'll show you how to play the diatonic arpeggios in the scale, and then I'm going to talk about how you can use that in your playing in a more natural musical way. This is easier because when you're practicing the arpeggios in the scale, then you can easily mix them with the scale notes, and you are much more free to use them and mix both arpeggio and scale into your playing. In the beginning, I'm just going to use the arpeggio of the chord itself. In fact, I'm going to use a C major 7 arpeggio over a C major chord, but later I'm going to add some more arpeggios to that, and that's going to be really easy because you already practiced them doing the exercise. Let's just start with the basic scale. So this is a C major scale in the 8th position. And if I play the diatonic arpeggios of this scale, then we get this. So this works really well for any kind of scale position, and of course it works just the same if you want to do it with harmonic minor or melodic minor. And the only place you have to watch out a little bit is if you're playing cased scale systems, because there, especially with melodic minor, harmonic minor, the fingerings can be a little bit messy or tricky to figure out, and you might need to think about what you want to do with it. The two other systems are a little bit more consistent when it comes to that, so they're a little bit easier to do this with. At least that's my experience. If you have another experience with this, then please leave a comment on this video. When you play this exercise, then one of the things you do want to be aware of is you don't have to think about each note, but you kind of want to know which arpeggio you're playing, because that's useful later when you want to start to use them. So you have an idea about where am I going to find an F major 7 arpeggio, where am I going to find an A minor 7 arpeggio. When you play this, it can be useful to also just practice it saying the arpeggio. So C major 7, D minor 7, E minor 7, F major 7, and so on and so forth. And that way that you're aware of where to find the different arpeggios. And of course, when you're doing that, you're also practicing learning all the diatonic chords of a scale. It's really useful information that you definitely want to have in your system. Now that you can play the arpeggios, because this exercise is not too difficult to get into your system, then we can start working on using the arpeggios to make some music, because that's really what the result of this, where we get the benefit of doing this exercise. And here I'm going to use a C major 7 arpeggio to make a line over a C major 7 chord. So an example of that could be something like this. So here I'm just using first just the basic C major 7 arpeggio and then a short melody coming out of the scale. Another example where I start mixing the arpeggio with the scale and also using some chromaticism, because that makes it sound a little bit more like jazz, would be something like this. So here I'm first playing a part of the arpeggio, then I'm inserting a scale note in between, and because I practiced the arpeggio in the scale, then I already know what notes are in between, so that's really easy to do. Then a bit of chromaticism, and then skipping up to end on the 9th of the C major 7. A really great variation on this exercise that is also immediately something you can turn into some great lines is to play the arpeggios as triplets and then add a chromatic leading note in front of the root. So that sounds like this. So this is really simple. If we look at how it works for an E minor 7 arpeggio, so I have my E minor 7 arpeggio in the scale here. And then I'm just adding a leading note in front of that, so that's a D sharp. and then playing the E as a triplet, so landing on the D and sort of really emphasizing that D as the highest note in the phrase. And this really sounds great if you're using it in lines. An example of that could be something like this. So here I'm just playing first, I'm starting on the D and then I'm going down to the B to play the C major 7 arpeggio. And then just adding this ascending melody after that from the C major scale. A similar idea using some chromaticism and then an octave higher on the C major 7 arpeggio. So here again starting on the D, but then going down and playing the arpeggio with the leading note. And then I'm adding a chromatic passing tone between D and C. Skipping down to the 5th of the chord, so the G. Do you also use this way of working with arpeggios and connecting arpeggios and scales, or do you have another way of doing that that works better for you? Let me know in the comments. Now we can use a C major 7 arpeggio over a C major 7 chord, but since we're practicing all the arpeggios, then it could be really useful to have a few more options available because we already practiced them, so we just need to get used to using them over the C major 7 chord, and then we have a lot more options to work with. To figure this out, then let's just look at why an arpeggio works over a chord. If I'm playing a C major 7 chord, then the reason why a C major 7 arpeggio sounds good is that I'm actually playing the notes that are also found in the chord. So of course if I'm playing an E, which is in the C major 7 arpeggio, then that sounds good on a C major 7 chord because there's an E in that chord as well. If we then want to find some more arpeggios that we can use, then we should look for the arpeggios that have a lot of common tones with the chord that we're playing over. And that's actually not that difficult to figure out, because if you look at a C major 7, then that's C, E, G and B. Now finding an arpeggio that has a lot of common tones with that one, well, if we start on E, so the 3rd of the chord, and then go up there, then 3 of the notes are the same as the C major 7, and then we're adding a D. So if we listen to how the D sounds on top of the C major 7, that's a 9, that sounds really okay. So that means that E minor 7 is a really good choice, and that actually works for most chords like this. If you can use the arpeggio from the 3rd of the chord. So for a D minor you want to use an F major 7, for an A minor you want to use a C major 7. Really thinking about what is the 3rd of the chord, what is the diatonic arpeggio that you can use there. And that's also why you want to know your diatonic chords and your diatonic arpeggios for all the scales that you use. The reason that I can keep on publishing videos every week is that there is a community of people over on Patreon that are supporting the channel. I'm very grateful for their support, and it's because of them that I can keep on making all these jazz guitar and music theory videos. If you want to help me keep making videos, then check out my Patreon page, and if you join us over on Patreon, I can also give you something in return for your support. So if we're using the E minor 7 arpeggio over a C major 7 chord, we can make lines like this. So here I'm really using the bebop exercise with the leading note, and then playing the E minor 7 arpeggio, and then I'm adding this, which is actually a chordal arpeggio, which I'm going to talk about in another video, and then ending on the 5th of the chord, G. And another example with a bit more chromaticism and also the higher version of the E minor 7 arpeggio could be something like this. So here I'm first just playing some chromaticism leading me to the E, and then I'm just playing up the arpeggio, and then ending on the 9th of the chord, which is the D. And just to show you how powerful this really is, if we use this on a very common progression in C major, so a 2-5-1 in the key of C major, then we have D minor 7, G7 to C major 7. On the D minor 7, I can use the D minor 7 arpeggio, of course, and I can use the arpeggio from the 3rd, so the 3rd is F, the arpeggio is F major 7. Then we have G7, so that's just the G7 arpeggio. The 3rd is B, and it's a B half diminished arpeggio from that note in C major. So then we have C major 7, first C major 7, then the 3rd is E, and there we have an E minor 7. And if we turn this into a really basic line, that could sound something like this. If you want to check out some more ideas on how you can use these arpeggios on a 2-5-1, then check out this video where I'm really focusing on using diatonic arpeggios on a 2-5-1. And it's also in the key of C major, so now that you already watched this video, it's going to be really easy to follow. If you want to learn more about jazz guitar and it's the first time you see one of my videos, then subscribe to my channel. If you want to help me keep making videos, then check out my Patreon page. That's about it for this time. Thank you for watching, and until next time.